Flak tore holes through the clouds above Germany as American bombers limped home, engines coughing smoke, wings shredded. Then out of the sun, sleek fighters with crimson-painted tails dropped like steel hawks. The Luftwaffe pilots thought they were just another escort squadron. Until the first pass. The red-tailed Mustangs did not break, did not scatter, did not retreat. They hunted. Within seconds, German radios exploded with panic as Me-109 spiraled into burning fields. One by one, the enemy learned why Luftwaffe briefings carried a new warning. Avoid the aircraft with red tails. Because once the Tuskegee Airmen locked onto a target, nothing escaped. Not even the aces of the Reich. The red-tailed Mustangs did not appear from nowhere. Their legend began on dusty training fields in the American South, far from the battlefields of Europe, where the sun baked the runways and the heat shimmered over rows of olive-green aircraft. In 1941, before a single red tail streaked across German skies, the men who would become the most feared escort pilots in the U.S. Army Air Forces stood in formation at Tuskegee Army Airfield. Alabama, black volunteers in crisp uniforms, nervous and determined, knowing that half the country doubted they could even fly. Some generals insisted they would crack under pressure. Some politicians said it was a waste of money. Newspapers called it a military experiment, as if the men standing on the tarmac were not already extraordinary. But when the engines roared to life and the first propellers spun dust into the air, everything changed. The Tuskegee Airmen lifted their planes off the ground, proving that ability had never been tied to skin. Training was brutal. Instructors pushed them harder than white pilots, not because they deserved harsher treatment, but because failure meant the program would end, and with it, the dream of black combat pilots. Cadets flew until their hands blistered, until their eyes stung from wind and oil, until their muscles ached from pulling G-forces in tight banking turns. They navigated thunderstorms over Georgia, fought crosswinds, stalled their engines, recovered from dives that sent their stomachs into their throats. Many washed out. Some died in training crashes. But those who endured earned silver wings no one could question. They learned discipline in the air, but they faced another battle on the ground. The South was segregated, and the Army was too. Black pilots were not allowed in officers' clubs. They ate separately. Some commanders refused to salute them. When they trained in Michigan for cold weather flights, they were arrested for entering a whites-only military club, despite wearing U.S. Army uniforms and lieutenant bars. They followed rules, filed reports, and kept flying. Every mission, every salute, every landing was a silent answer to those waiting for them to fail. By early 1943, the war in Europe was burning. Germany's Luftwaffe was tearing through American bomber formations. B-17s and B-24s returned from missions with holes punched through their wings, engines shot to pieces and entire crews missing. Fighter escorts were not staying with the bombers. Some chased dogfights, abandoning their formations and leaving the slow-moving aircraft to die. The 8th Air Force needed disciplined pilots. They needed escorts who would never leave their bombers behind. So they sent for the Red Tails. The 332nd Fighter Group, commanded by Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., deployed to North Africa, then Italy. Their P-40s were outdated and underpowered, but the men made them dance across the sky. Then came the upgrade. The P-51 Mustang, sleek, fast, maneuverable, with drop tanks that could reach Berlin and back. The Tuskegee mechanics painted the tails bright crimson, so bomber crews could spot them easily. Soon the sky itself carried their signature. Their first major escort missions began over enemy territory, only clouds and death below. Bomber crews watched nervously through plexiglass windows as flak burst like black umbrellas around them. And then they saw them. Tiny specks growing larger, sunlight flashing off polished wings. Over the radio, pilots whispered, "Red tails were safe." The Luftwaffe learned the truth soon enough. German pilots were trained to look for weak escorts, squadrons that would break formation, chase glory, leave bombers exposed. But when Me-109s or FW-190s dove at the American bombers under red tail protection, nothing went as expected. Tuskegee pilots held formation tight as steel. They flew wingtip to wingtip, refusing to be lured into reckless dogfights. They shielded the bombers like living armor. Only when a German fighter committed to attack did the red tails strike. Fast, precise, merciless. They didn't hunt for kills. They hunted for protection. And yet, Kills came anyway. Pilots like Charles McGee, Roscoe Brown, Lee Archer, and Lucky Lester earned reputations for being faster, sharper, fearless. They chased down the Luftwaffe's best and shot them from the sky, returning to base with empty guns and bullet-scarred fuselages. But the number that mattered was printed on mission reports by tired, oil-stained ground crews. Bombers lost. 0, again and again, not once. Not twice, for months. Bomber crews began requesting them by name. Entire squadrons wrote, "Send the red tails" on briefing chalkboards. On the ground, Tuskegee pilots lived in tents, patching flight suits with hand-stitched repairs, enduring slurs from white soldiers who still didn't want them on their airfield. But the pilots walked past every insult with heads high. Their victories were their answer. By 1944, the Luftwaffe noticed. German briefings warned fighter pilots to avoid the Mustangs with red-painted tails. Some thought it was Allied propaganda, until they met them at 25,000 feet. The red tails escorted bombers all the way to Berlin, flying deeper into Germany than nearly any other Allied fighter group. On March 24, 1945, they met a new threat, a jet. Germany unveiled the Me-262, the fastest aircraft in the world, capable of outrunning any propeller-driven fighter. Bomber crews panicked when they saw the silver jet streaking toward them like knives of light. But the Tuskegee Airmen did not hesitate. Roscoe Brown rolled his Mustang into a steep dive, firing at the jet as it tried to climb away. The tracers found their mark. The Me-262 burst into flames and spiraled earthward, one of the first jets ever shot down in combat. Word spread fast. The myth was broken. The invincible German jet was not invincible at all. The red tails had shattered it. Their legend grew, but their discipline never cracked. When younger pilots landed shaking after missions, older airmen patted their shoulders, checked their wings, and reminded them of the rule: stay with the bombers. Always. Their pride was not in kills. It was in the planes that returned safely. By the end of the war, the numbers told everything the world needed to know. 578 missions. On 12 enemy aircraft destroyed, nearly 1,000 bomber crews protected, and one of the lowest escort loss rates in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. The experiment had become a masterpiece. Yet when they came home, many were denied entry to officers' clubs. Some were told to use colored-only restrooms in uniform, but they stood taller than racism. They had faced the Luftwaffe at 30,000 feet. No segregation sign on Earth could diminish men who had flown through fire. Their red tails became more than paint. They became history. The winter sky above Italy was the color of gunmetal. When the bombers formed up, B-17s and B-24s droning like a swarm of trembling beasts heading toward the Alps. Their engines left oily trails across the clouds as they climbed. Each plane heavy with bombs destined for German factories, rail yards, oil refineries, the machinery that kept Hitler's war alive. In the glass noses of the bombers, young crewmen wiped frost from their goggles and scanned the sky for the thing every Allied airman feared. Me-109 slicing down from the sun. They'd seen it before. Escorts disappearing the moment dogfights began, leaving them alone to die by cannon fire and rocket bursts. Some bomber crews had stopped believing fighter pilots cared if they lived or died, but not today. Low on the horizon, a formation of fighters climbed to meet them. Sleek Mustangs, wings gleaming, tails painted blood red. The bomber radio crackled. Escort inbound. 302nd Fighter Group attaching to formation. The crews watched in disbelief as the Mustangs pulled tight into defensive positions, one pair beneath each wing, others above, guarding from every angle. Instead of wandering off looking for personal glory, the red tails locked in, silent and vigilant. A bomber gunner named Joe Sansone recalled years later, "They flew like they were welded to us. Nobody got through." The mission crossed into enemy airspace where flak batteries waited like wolves. Explosions blossomed around the formation, black bursts, metal shards, smoke and flame. Bomber wings rattled violently. Shrapnel punched holes through fuselages, tore open oxygen tanks, shattered glass. Men gripped their controls, praying engines wouldn't fail. And still the Mustangs held formation, engines howling, guns ready, watching every direction. Then it happened. Specks in the distance, tiny at first, then growing, sunlight flashing off wings. A German squadron dropping out of the high clouds, Me-109s with yellow noses, veterans of the Eastern Front. Their commander radioed orders in clipped German. They expected the escorts to break. They expected fear. Instead, the red tails tilted upward as one, climbing to intercept. No hesitation, no panic, just precision. The German leader rolled his fighter and dove, cannon blazing. He never saw the red tail behind him. Captain Charles McGee opened fire, his tracers stitching across the 109's fuselage. The German fighter burst into flame and tumbled sideways, trailing smoke as it fell toward the mountains. The sky erupted. Bullets sparked across aluminum skins. Machine guns thundered. Bombers shook as enemy fire tore through their frames. But every time a German swooped toward the helpless giants, a red-tailed Mustang was waiting. Lieutenant Lucky Lester closed fast on another fighter, his Mustang screaming in a tight turn, his wings cutting through the clouds. He squeezed the trigger, 3-second burst. The 109 exploded into shreds of spinning metal. His gun barrels smoked, paint scorched black from heat, but he never broke formation again. He rolled back to the bombers, dropping beneath their wings to cover the blind spots. On the bomber intercoms, men who had seen hundreds of planes die suddenly felt something new: hope. The Luftwaffe pilots grew frustrated. They expected easy kills. Instead, every attack failed. Some Germans tried to lure the Mustangs into chasing them, peeling away from the formation, diving toward distant valleys. The red tails didn't follow. They wouldn't abandon their bombers for anything. As one German ace later admitted, they flew not like hunters but like guardians. And guardians are harder to defeat. The battle raged across miles of sky, gunfire echoing between cloud banks, engines screaming under murderous strain. A bomber's tail gunner shouted over the intercom, "Red tail on your 6. He's got him, boys, he's got him." Another Me-109 fell in flames. By the time the mission ended and the bombers turned for home, the Luftwaffe had lost too many fighters for too few kills. The Germans retreated, engines smoking, ammunition spent, pride wounded. For the first time, they had been stopped cold, by a squadron many believed shouldn't exist at all. Back in Italy, the bombers landed battered and bullet-scarred, but intact. Ground crews stared in disbelief as one after another rolled onto the airfield. Mechanics counted the holes, hundreds of punctures from flak and cannon shells, but the crews were alive. Pilots climbed down, shaking, eyes wide, adrenaline still burning in their veins. Then they saw the Mustangs taxi in, red tails glinting in the dying sunlight, and something extraordinary happened. The bomber crews applauded. Men who once mocked the idea of black fighter pilots now lined the runway, cheering as the Tuskegee Airmen stepped out of their cockpits. Oil stains on their flight suits, sweat streaked across their faces, hands trembling from G-forces and fear, but alive, victorious. For the first time in their lives, white officers saluted them openly. Word spread fast across Allied air bases. New rumors came with each returning crew. They never leave us. They fly through hell and don't flinch. If the red tails are with you, you're going home. It reached Germany even faster. Luftwaffe commanders held emergency briefings, warning pilots, avoid the Mustangs with red tails. They do not fight like other American escorts. Some German aces scoffed, until they met them in the sky and paid for their arrogance with fire and steel. From that day forward, when bomber crews gathered before dawn for mission briefings, men whispered prayers not for clear skies, not for weak flak, but for 6 simple words written on a chalkboard: Escort 332nd Fighter Group. When that happened, fear lifted. Shoulders straightened, hearts steadied, because the red tails did not just protect planes, they restored faith. They became the shield between death and home. Spring 1944. The war was turning, but not fast enough. Germany still controlled the heart of Europe, and every mission into its skies was a gamble with death. On the morning of June 9th, the red tails launched from Ramitelli, the sun just cresting the Adriatic Sea, painting the runway gold. Mechanics waved, dust swirling behind the Mustangs as their wheels lifted off. The target was deep inside enemy territory. Munich's rail yards, one of the arteries feeding Hitler's armies. The bombers would be slow, exposed, easy prey. The Luftwaffe would come. Everyone knew it. High above the Alps, the bombers droned forward like steel whales. The pilots could see the snow-covered peaks below, jagged teeth tearing at the sky. Gunners scanned every cloud, every glint of light, every shadow. Some whispered prayers into frozen oxygen masks. Others stared at photographs taped to cockpit glass. families, wives, children waiting at home. Then the red tails rose out of the haze, sliding smoothly into formation. 16 Mustangs, tails blood red, wings sharp enough to cut the wind in half. They took their places without a word. 2 above, 2 below, the rest drifting along the bomber stream like sentinels. The bomber crews relaxed. The air felt safer. It did not stay safe for long. German radar tracked the formation. Luftwaffe pilots were rushed to their fighters. Me-109s spun propellers to life. W-190s rolled from hangars, mechanics diving out of the way as the engine screamed. Radio chatter filled the cockpits. Intercept heading 085. Altitude 6,000, move. The Germans launched like arrows. The first wave arrived in a dive, sunlight flashing off wings as they screamed toward the bombers. In earlier missions, escorts had peeled away, chasing glory while the bombers died. But the red tails didn't move. They stayed locked to the formation, engines humming, guns cold, letting the Germans come. B-24 gunners braced, tracking targets with trembling fingers. At the last possible second, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. gave the order. The sky exploded. Mustangs peeled off their positions in perfect timing, diving like falcons attacking prey. Tracer rounds slashed through the clouds. 2 Luftwaffe fighters went down instantly, one smoking, one shattered. The rest panicked. They expected chaos. Instead, they found discipline sharper than any blade. A German ace named Otto Schwabe dove toward a bomber's belly, his cannons spitting fire. He got 1 second of clean aim before a red-tailed Mustang roared out of nowhere, guns blazing. His engine erupted. Flames tore across his fuselage. His parachute never opened before the ground met him. The Luftwaffe regrouped and came again, this time from the sun, a classic tactic. They dropped in vertical attacks so fast the bombers could barely track them. But the red tails were ready. Major George Spanky Roberts climbed straight into the attack, flipping his Mustang on its back and firing into the blinding light. A German fighter burst apart so close to a bomber that debris clanged off its wing. The bomber crews watching through bullet-cracked windows could hardly believe it. They had heard rumors of the red tails, they had heard the stories, but seeing them, feeling them, was something else entirely. They weren't escorts. They were guardians. Another German squadron arrived, 12 fresh fighters, veterans of battles from Russia to France. They dove in, guns flashing, confident they'd overwhelm the Mustangs by sheer numbers. But the red tails fought like a single mind. They protected the bombers, every movement deliberate, every burst controlled. They didn't chase. They didn't scatter. They didn't fall for traps. They simply blocked death. Lieutenant Lee Archer, flying at high altitude, spotted a German fighter creeping along the edge of the formation, trying to slip beneath the bomber stream. He rolled over and dove hard, engine screaming. His guns chewed through the enemy cockpit. The German pilot bailed out, chute blossoming above a burning wreck. Archer pulled back into formation, breathing hard, heart hammering. He could hear his wingman laughing through the radio, just one sharp bark of relief. Because they were still alive. But the Luftwaffe wasn't done. High above the chaos, shapes shimmered in the sunlight. Jets. The dreaded Me-262s. Even the best Allied pilots had nightmares about them. They were too fast, too quiet, too deadly. A bomber gunner shouted, voice cracking over the airwaves. Jets! 6 o'clock high! The Mustangs turned to meet the future of war. The jets struck like lightning. They ripped through the formation at impossible speed, cannons spewing fire. A B-17's wing exploded in a fireball. Engines tearing free, men screaming as the bomber spun into the clouds. The Mustangs pushed their engines to the limit, diving to intercept. Roscoe Brown saw one of the jets climbing for another attack. He banked, rolled inverted, and dove so close his Mustang shook apart, metal groaning against gravity. The jet broke away, but Brown stayed behind him. Pushing his engine past redline, he fired, tracers hit. The Me-262 burst into black smoke, pilot ejecting from a shredded cockpit. Down below, bomber crews cheered like it was salvation. By the time the mission ended, the Luftwaffe was in ruins. 8 German fighters down, no bombers lost to enemies on the approach. The jets had been beaten. The veterans of the Reich, men who had survived the worst skies in Europe, returned home bruised and rattled. Some refused to fly against the red tails again. Others called in sick. More than one demanded transfer to safer fronts. Back at base, the Mustangs landed smoking, low on ammunition, some with bullet holes stitched across their wings. Ground crews counted the damage, flak punctures, shredded paint, fuel leaks, yet every pilot stepped onto the dirt. Not one was missing. In the officer's tent, someone wrote on the mission board, "Bombers lost, 0, and beneath it, another pilot scribbled a sentence that would become legend. The Germans came hunting and we hunted the hunters. That night, lightning flashed over the Adriatic. Thunder rolled through the tents. The pilots lay on their bunks, boots unlaced, listening to the storm. Some whispered about home. Some cried quietly in the dark. They were heroes, but they were also human, tired, afraid, and never sure if morning would come. But morning always came, and with it, the red tails rose into the sky once more. Berlin was not just another city on a map. It was the heart of the Reich, the place from which Hitler believed he could rule a world of ash and submission. Every Allied bomber pilot knew that flying to Berlin meant stepping into the deadliest sky on Earth. Flak was thicker, fighters fiercer, the air itself full of smoke and hate. Many crews never made it home. Some vanished without a trace. So when the Red Tails were ordered to escort bombers to Berlin in March of 1945, they understood exactly what they were being asked. This was not just a mission, it was a message. The first all-black fighter group would protect American bombers all the way to Hitler's doorstep. Before dawn, Ramitelli Airfield shook with engine thunder. Ground crews loaded ammunition belts with hands that trembled from exhaustion and cold. Pilots strapped in, checking controls, radios, gauges. Outside, the sea wind carried the smell of fuel and salt. Clouds hung low, promising turbulence. The mission commander walked the line, shaking hands, offering a few steady words. The bombers lifted off first, dozens of them, engines shaking the ground. They climbed like slow giants into the gray morning sky. Minutes later, the Mustangs followed, red tails gleaming even in the pale light, rising into formation above the Adriatic, their propellers carving through clouds. Hours passed in icy air. Condensation frosted canopies. Oxygen masks chafed faces raw. Frostbite gnawed at fingers through thin gloves. The world shrank to engine noise and the endless white of clouds. But when the sky cleared, Germany stretched beneath them, black forests, smoking cities, and rivers like steel snakes across the land. Then the flak began. It rose from the ground in black clouds that shredded the sky, explosions spreading shrapnel fast as thought. Bombers shuddered as metal punched through wings. Pilots gripped controls with frozen hands, praying their engines would stay alive. The Mustangs wove through the bursts, refusing to break formation. They flew so close to the bombers that fragments sometimes tore through their own fuselages. Still, they held their line. Deeper into Germany they went. The radio hissed with tension. Somewhere in the distance, factories smoked from previous raids. Rail lines twisted like broken veins. And then, faint at first, came the sound bomber crews dreaded, the whine of fighters climbing fast, Luftwaffe squadrons, veterans, aces, men who had been killing Allied planes since the first days of the war. Their Me-109s and FW-190s appeared in every direction, above, below, ahead. Dozens, maybe more. The sky suddenly looked small. The Germans expected panic. What they found was discipline. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. gave a calm order over the radio. His voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It carried the weight of every pilot who had died to prove the Red Tails belonged. Hold formation. Protect the bombers. The Luftwaffe dove, and the Mustangs moved like a single machine. Some climbed to meet the attackers head-on. Others dropped beneath the bombers to block low-angle strikes. Guns roared. Contrails tangled in violent spirals. German cannon shells flashed past, punching holes into the sky. A bomber's wing caught fire, then was saved as two Mustangs chased the attacker away before the flames reached fuel tanks. Major James Ellison pulled into a tight turn, forcing his Mustang through a wall of flak. The shock rattled his teeth. He locked onto a Me-109, fired one clean burst, and watched it burst apart in a spray of metal. Another German veteran tried a classic tactic, dive straight through the bomber stream at full throttle, fire, and escape downward. But this time a red tail followed. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown chased the fighter into a near-vertical dive, pushing his engine until the frame vibrated. Brown fired into the spinning blur below him. The German pilot's canopy shattered, smoke pouring out. The fighter crashed in a flaming arc across a frozen field. Bombers rumbled onward. The must reach Berlin. More fighters arrived, fresh squadrons pouring in. It was the largest attack some pilots had ever seen. A B-24 gunner screamed into his radio, "They're everywhere!" But the Mustangs never broke. Some pilots ran low on ammunition. Some ran low on fuel. Some had control surfaces shredded by gunfire. Yet none of them turned back. Then, in the distance, across miles of smoke and ruin, the bombers saw it. Berlin. Flak burst in waves above the city. The sky was thick with fire. But they were close enough. Bomb bay doors opened. The earth below burned. The Luftwaffe saw the falling bombs and threw itself into a final, desperate charge. But it was too late. The Red Tails blocked every lane of attack, sacrificing altitude, ammunition, and safety to keep the bombers alive. When the last flight of bombs tumbled into the city, the U.S. formation wheeled away, engines wheezing, planes rattling as they fled west. On the journey home, there were fewer German fighters. Some were damaged, some out of fuel, some simply refused to approach Mustangs with red-painted tails ever again. Hours later, the bombers landed, alive. Ground crews stared in shock as plane after plane rolled onto the runway. Some were barely held together by rivets and luck. Some had holes the size of fists torn through their wings. One plane landed without brakes. The crew jumped out and kissed the ground, but they lived because the Red Tails never left them. That night, bomber officers gathered in the mission tent, exhausted, shaking, and silent. Then someone asked how many bombers had been lost. Mechanics checked their clipboards. Pilots checked their mission logs. 0. A silent cheer spread, men too tired to shout but not too tired to feel pride. The Red Tails had taken American bombers to Berlin and brought them back again. A German ace captured after the war later said, "The red-tailed fighters, we did not like them. They were too persistent. They did not break. They chased us like wolves." The Mustangs weren't just feared, they were respected. And somewhere in Alabama, where men once trained under burning sun and segregation signs, the red paint on a Mustang tail meant something powerful. That greatness had nothing to do with color, and everything to do with courage. When the war finally began to collapse around Germany like a burning house, the Tuskegee Airmen did not celebrate. There were no parades in the sky, no champagne in the cockpit, no time to pause. Victory was measured one bomber, one crew, one frozen bullet-torn mile at a time. Spring of 1945 brought relentless missions, cutting supply lines, destroying rail yards, and escorting crews who were now flying deeper into a dying Reich, where every flak gunner and fighter pilot fought with the desperation of a man with nowhere left to run. On some days, the Red Tails took to the air and found almost no resistance. The Luftwaffe was starving. Fuel drained, pilots scraped from flight schools with only a handful of hours in the cockpit. But on other days, like cornered animals, the last of Germany's aces struck back hard. They launched battered fighters from crumbling runways, engines coughing black smoke, wheels lifting as Allied strafing runs ripped across the ground. These pilots were outnumbered, outgunned, but not yet ready to surrender. During one of the final missions, the Mustangs swept low across a rail junction where German soldiers tried to flee east. The sky was streaked with smoke from burning oil tanks. Freight cars exploded beneath .50 caliber fire, wheels flying off the rails. Some enemy troops threw down weapons and ran. Others fired desperately with machine guns that sparked uselessly against armored fuselages. But the war was already finished. They were only the last echoes of a collapsing empire. When Germany surrendered, victory felt unreal. Pilots stepped out of their cockpits into a world suddenly filled with sunlight and silence. Ground crews walked the runway without listening for enemy engines. Mechanics swept shells and spent casings into piles as if cleaning the floor of a warehouse. A few men wept. Others stared out across the Adriatic Sea, wondering how they had survived what so many others did not. The statistics would later speak for themselves. Hundreds of missions, more than 1,000 bomber escorts, dozens of downed enemy aircraft, and one of the lowest bomber loss rates of the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. The Red Tails had become a symbol not just of skill but of trust. When bomber crews saw them slide into formation, nerves settled. Hearts slowed. Men believed they might live. But back home, the world the airmen returned to was not yet the world they had earned. Some boarded trains to southern towns still marked by Jim Crow laws. They walked past whites-only signs wearing uniforms decorated with combat ribbons. Wives and families hugged them, but not every town welcomed them home. Many newspapers barely mentioned them. Some officers who had once doubted them now spoke quietly about their success, as if uncomfortable to say it aloud. And yet something had changed. Word spread through bomber groups, through regiments, through entire divisions. White gunners and pilots who had seen the red tails save them midair told everyone who would listen. These men were warriors. Race meant nothing under flak bursts and tracer fire. Skill was skill. Courage was courage. Blood was blood. Slowly, painfully, the truth fought its way into the American conscience. The Tuskegee Airmen had done what no lecture, no argument, and no law had ever accomplished. They shattered prejudice with proof, hammered through hatred with results. They forced the military and the country to face a new reality. And in 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. The shadow of Ramitelli stretched all the way into history. Years later, surviving pilots would gather beneath museum lights or stand beside restored Mustangs in desert air shows. Their hair had grayed, their voices softened, but when engines roared or propellers spun, their eyes sharpened like they were back in the cockpit. They spoke of the men who never returned, pilots shot down over Hungary, across the Danube, over the Alps. They remembered those whose parachutes never opened, whose names were carved into quiet headstones far from home. They remembered the sound of gunfire rattling the wings, the smell of oil leaking into the cockpit, the cold taste of oxygen, the way a bomber crew waved from a waist gunner's window after surviving a mission that should have killed them. One of the pilots, at a reunion decades later, placed a hand on the wing of a restored Mustang. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We didn't fly for medals," he said. "We flew for the boys in those bombers. Every plane we brought home was a life, sometimes 10. Historians would calculate numbers. Politicians would give speeches. Museums would mount photographs of red tails gleaming on wartime airstrips. But the truth lived in something simpler. The memory of men who had earned respect not by asking, but by performing. There is a story told by one bomber gunner in the 15th Air Force. His B-24 came under attack by Me-262 jets, the fastest fighters in the world, streaking past like metal lightning. The escorts were too far back to help. The crew braced for death. Then, like a shadow cutting across the sun, a red-tailed Mustang dove so hard its wings shook. The pilot fired until smoke poured from the jet's engine. The gunner never saw the Mustang pilot's face, but he never forgot the tail. Many years after the war, that same gunner visited a museum in Alabama. He stood beneath a red-tailed Mustang on display. His hand trembled as he touched the metal. A young guide asked if he liked the aircraft. The old man said only, "I'm alive because of them." The Tuskegee Airmen taught the world a lesson born in blood and sky. Greatness is not a gift granted by society. It is earned in the crucible of trial, proven by discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering resolve. When the Luftwaffe warned its pilots to avoid the red-tailed Mustangs, it was already too late. The enemy had seen them. The enemy had feared them. The enemy had lost to them. And long after the war ended, the legacy of those pilots did not fade. It soared. In every generation of airmen who followed, in every integrated squadron, in every salute to a black officer standing proudly in uniform, the echo of Ramitelli remained. Because history remembered the truth. The red tails were among the finest fighter pilots the world had ever known.